Let's go. Okay, awesome. Yuma, do you want to kick us off? Can you introduce yourself?
Hi. My name is Guiomar. I studied telecommunications engineering at the Polytechnic in Madrid, and I did my PhD on biomedical engineering there. So right after, I went to Montreal to the MNI, to the Montreal Neurological Institute, and I worked with MEG with Professor Sylvain Valle, and we developed the Omega database, which is a huge database where you can share MEG data, and I also contributed to Brainstorm software. So my expertise is on MEG, and I work on the MEG extension.
Yuma, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Your microphone, I think, is brushing against something. It's really noisy.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yeah, that is better.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to just say the last little bit that you were when I interrupted you? Repeat that.
Yes. Well, I did my postdoc on the MNI in Montreal, and I worked with Sylvain Valle, and we developed the Omega database, which is a database to share MEG data openly, and I also contributed to Brainstorm software. So my expertise is on magnetoencephalography, and I also work on the MEG extension of the BIDS. So that's my background. And yeah, I hope I can contribute to the BIDS steering group with my written knowledge. So.
Awesome, thank you. Melanie.
Yeah, I'm up. So my background is a master's in physics, and then I did a PhD in medical imaging. The first master was in Germany. The second one was here in Copenhagen in Denmark. And then I went abroad and did a postdoc at the Martino Center for Biomedical Imaging in the US, where I started working with MRI. And I got introduced because after returning from my postdoc in the US, I've been working in one of the biggest PET centers of the world. And from there, I met Chris Korgulewski at the NeurHack Week in 2017. And he was just about to start a PET extension, but hadn't worked with PET before himself. And somehow we started talking about it, and I ended up taking over the PET extension of BIDS. So that's how I got wrapped into all of this. And since then, I've been working on finalizing the PET extension. PET is kind of a special case, I would say. It's very complicated to also get blood data involved and everything. So we're just about to finalize our first draft and to make a pull request. And we just have published or have gotten accepted, and it's soon to be published, guidelines paper for how people should publish PET papers. And in that paper, we're actually recommending also to use BIDS and to follow the BIDS standard in order to make the papers reproducible. So big steps forward for the PET community, I think.
Nice. Let me continue. Hi, I'm Robert Oostenveld. I'm a physicist by training, but I have already been working in neuroscience for more than 20 years, primarily with MEG. I'm working at the Donnerson Institute in Nijmegen. But I've also worked in Germany, in Münster, in Denmark, and the last few years I've been off and on, had a part-time position at the Karolinska Institute. At the Donnerson Institute, I work together with a lot of my colleagues who are also using imaging data, fMRI, but also EEG and a lot of other modalities. So that's something that I really care about, the whole scope of the different types of data. And in already for a long time, I've been sharing electrophysiology analysis methods in the Field Trip Toolbox. And in 2016, at the Biomech conference, we met with a bunch of other toolbox developers, with MNE Python, with Brainstorm, with SPM. I think EG might also have been involved, and we discussed that we needed something such as BIDS, which at that time was just published, and we also needed something like that for MEG. And we set out first to implement BIDS for MEG, and then I also stayed involved in extending BIDS to EEG and intracranial EEG. So that's more or less my involvement in BIDS, and yeah, so that's also how I hope to further contribute in like making sure that all the different areas of BIDS, or all the different areas of neuroscience, that they somehow can contribute to like us improving standards in neuroscience and neuroimaging.
So I'm Russ Poldrack, professor at Stanford, and have been involved with BIDS from the beginning. So, you know, I've been doing data sharing for about 10 years, starting with the Open fMRI project, and we had developed a kind of an initial way to organize data for that framework. And when Chris Gorgolewski joined my lab around 2015, it was becoming clear that our old framework was, you know, kind of not working really well, and we wanted to think about something much broader. And so, you know, he really kind of got the ball rolling. We had an initial meeting here, and then we've had a bunch of meetings since, and that's kind of where BIDS came from. So, so I'm, you know, as I said before, I kind of view myself as sort of like the historian of the group, and can, you know, offer context about why particular things were done and the way they were done. And I'm also interested, obviously, in, you know, how we can extend BIDS out into other sorts of directions.
Awesome. And so I am Kirsty Whitaker. I'm here at the Alan Turing Institute in London, and I am in the Jack Good Zoom room. So just to explain why my name is Jack Good. Jack Good was a cryptographer who worked with Alan Turing at Bletchley Park during World War II. So we have rooms that are named after famous mathematicians, computer scientists, data scientists. Come and visit us, it's really nice here. So I got involved in BIDS because I mentored as part of the Google Summer of Code in 2018, a really fantastic student called Patrick Park, he and I extended a sort of wiki page that had been started by a few members of the BIDS community to kind of try and make the very dry text of a standard, which, to be clear, a standard needs to be really dry, like it has to be really sort of factual and no room for ambiguity. We were trying to kind of de-jargonize that, or explain some of that jargon, and try and sort of onboard people a little bit to being able to join the BIDS community, both as users, but also as contributors and people who are able to build the community and kind of maintain the health of the standards. So that's the big thing that I'm really interested in, helping the steering group to kind of navigate, is thinking about the sustainability and sort of building up a really strong community where lots of people feel able to share their expertise, whether that's giving a talk about BIDS and telling people, whether that's enhancing the documentation to make it easier for people to use, whether it's extending in the same way that some of the other steering group members have already talked about. The other thing that I've worked on is BEP 001, so the very first BEP. I wasn't there at the beginning, I've joined halfway through, with Hillers and Aga and a bunch of really awesome people who've been working to extend BIDS for quantitative structural MRI, and we have lots of fun with field maps. Ask me about BID, ask me about field maps, that's not the point of today. So yeah, so thank you so much for being here. I want to just make sure that we also allow Franklin to say hi and introduce himself. You are muted, Franklin. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm Franklin. I'm, I guess, the project manager, is kind of overseeing and helping, you know, assist BIDS and administrating out the governance document, the steering group, things like that. So I'm interested in just kind of making sure that the process of how we do BIDS and just keeping that managed.
Yeah, thank you so much. So does anyone have, I'm going to sort of like tread water for a minute or so, not like literally, just in case any questions pop up in the question and answer box. We're here for, you know, we've got a full hour, so there's lots of time to answer some questions. So this is just me kind of like filling time, just in case anyone has any really big question that they want to bring up.
I want to just say that we are a very complementary group of people, and almost I think all the modalities that we have in neuroimaging, we have representatives here, are represented here by people. So also if some of them is not, we are super happy to have input for follow the web extensions leaders or so they can give us input.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see any questions appearing, so there's lots of opportunities to ask questions as they come up. But one of the things that we put on our agenda that we wanted to kind of talk about on this webinar were communications. And one of the things that we were thinking about in our first few meetings as a steering group was thinking about either streamlining or at least documenting a little bit more clearly how communications happen within the BIDS ecosystem. It's probably going to be the case that there are lots and lots of different ways of communicating and they work differently for different people. I'm going to have Robert talk about his work updating the BIDS website, and then I'll let the other folks on the steering group chat about kind of their thoughts about communications. But this is also a great opportunity if any of you who are watching want to add in some thoughts. Probably it's the case that there is not one size that will fit all, and so having a plurality of options is good, but it's definitely confusing and a little bit complicated. So this is one of the things that we're sort of thinking about and we're listening about now. But Robert, do you want to talk about the website? Oh, you are muted. You got it.
Yeah. Perhaps some of you have already seen that the website has had some updates. It's not major updates yet. It's still the same style. But as Christy was saying, we identified that there's a lot of scattered information. BIDS has grown quite rapidly, like exponentially, with a lot of different activities going on, and these different activities were documented on different places. And we've identified that it would be good to try to bring them more together. So to make the bids.neuroimaging.io website, to make that more of a central place in the whole ecosystem, so that we can basically, from that point out to the different places where we actually have the documentation. Of course, each of the BEPs typically has its own documentation. We have the specification, which is hosted on a different website for technical reasons. There's a lot of information as well on GitHub. But what we hope to do, and also that's also where we need you from the community to contribute, is that we can converge part of the scattered information so that we can keep the communication line shorter and that we can keep each other better informed about what's going on. And hopefully the improved website will help for that. So it's now based on Jekyll. It's easier for you to contribute. It's very similar or perhaps slightly simpler than contributing to the specification itself. It goes through GitHub. You can send a pull request, and yeah, so I hope that we'll have more people contribute to the website. But of course, the website is not the only place where things happen, because certain things are much better in a direct interaction. So that's why we also want to continue the efforts on Eurostars, which I think is a great platform for direct, very quick return on question type of interaction. We have the Google discussion group, which I think is also really valuable, because with that we can reach out to I think to a different audience than the audience that we're reaching with Eurostars. But it's so we were aware that we have different communication channels for different needs. And actually this community forum meeting is actually also us communicating to you guys, but also you communicating to us. So that's what we've identified. So that's also where we would like to hear how you think that we can improve the communication between all of us.
Thanks so much, Robert. Did anyone else on the Zoom group want to join in with any thoughts about communication? I think I'll say that one of the things that I'm really excited about with the website is that we have this blog section, and so hopefully it's kind of a place that we can send out somewhat regular updates that are searchable, that can be found, and I think what we're hoping is that the website will become a little bit more useful for people who are joining BIDS for the first time. That will sort of become a little bit more of a hub of pathways that people can follow. So we don't want to necessarily tell everyone to behave in exactly the same way, but probably the website we hope will start to become one of the like sort of a touch point that you can find out where to go elsewhere. Russ, did you want to join in?
I was going to say something about the first question. I don't know if anything else you want to say about that, and then I can take the question about the work folder.
That's great. So the last thing that I want to say about communication channels is there's two things I wanted to say about the communication channels. One is that it's really, really helpful for you to tell us what you like, but also the folks who join this webinar are probably pretty tied into lots and lots of the different communication channels. So you who are listening right now are probably not like a super problematic space. You're really, really involved, and we really appreciate that. So the big ask would be if you can go back to people that you know, people in your research groups or people in your institutions, and just ask them what would be the easiest for them, what would be most helpful for them, and kind of why. Because I think probably there's going to be these different spaces that are going to work for different people. And that's maybe an interesting like piece of documentation that we could create and put up on the website maybe to explain how people can get involved for the particular purpose that they need. The other ask is that in updating the website, one of the things that we've realized is that there are these little sort of but very specialized technical skills like continuous integration and building a preview of the website so that folks don't have to kind of do all of the building on their local machine. That feels like, to us, that feels like one of those skills that if you have it, it's probably really easy for you. And if you don't have it, it's like N days of Googling and still not knowing what to do. So I think also there's a really interesting future direction around capturing people who have particular skills and who are willing to be tagged maybe when we need those skills to come along and help out. That I think is one of the greatest like powers of open source development. And if we just, at the moment, we would really love it if we could build a preview of the website in a pull request so that people could easily review it and give feedback on it without having to do all of the building and reviewing on their own computer. So that's just like a very specific ask that if anyone is like, oh yeah, I can do that, obviously, we would love to put you on a little list of people that we can ping to ask for that help. I think I'm good on comms if anyone else wants to shout out. But I think we've got a few different questions.
Kirsty, maybe we should just mention one of the things that came up after Tuesday was also that we're really trying to kind of, or Robert has been trying to make a list or force the people that are in charge of the BIDS to kind of say how their whatever subgroup that they're working with, how they are communicating. So I think it would also be nice to hear, especially from people involved in other extensions, you know, make sure that it lists somewhere which tool to use to communicate, so that if people want to get involved, that they can actually know how. And maybe Robert can already say if someone has answered you besides.
Yeah, I've seen that some of the BEP leads have already updated the BEP documents. And I think that's really great, and also like in a more elaborate form than I had expected, like very invitive. Like there was one BEP that has a weekly Skype meeting. It's clear now who you have to send an email if you want to be on that Skype meeting. And I think that's really important that we that the development. So BIDS is an open project, an open community. And we should also try to get the development as open as we can, because we need the expertise and the skills, the insight of the community at large.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Thanks for remembering that. That's really great. Russ, why don't you do this question for Craig?
Yeah. Okay. So the first question is about why from Craig started about why isn't the work folder part of the spec? So my understanding is the work folder is really a NiPipe construct. This is, the place where NiPipe keeps all of its kind of intermediates between the raw data and the final derivatives. And my understanding is that would be a bit of a nightmare to try to actually formalized, and given that it's really meant to be kind of intermediate stuff, it's not clear that, like, you know, we will have a derivatives spec soon, and you know, it's going to describe the ultimate derivatives that should come out. I don't think it's going to try to touch what happens in the middle, just because, you know, somebody might not be using IPipe, they might have a different sort of intermediate pathway. What we really care about is the kind of ultimate endpoint. So then the question goes on. This brings up a bigger question about when informal conventions become part of the spec. And others. Oh, okay. So sorry. Craig had a response to my comment. Isn't that just having something called work that isn't even listed as an option in BIDS? A validator should flag that as bad. I guess it depends on where the yeah, I was going to say, you know, BIDS ignore will allow one to do that. It's probably bad practice for the software to be putting, you know, the intermediate work stuff within, which my guess would be that it's not the best practice to put it in, you know, within the BIDS directory itself. But if it does, then yeah, I know my fMRI prep does it. But we could use BIDS ignore for that. So with regard to the question of, you know, when does something informal become part of the spec, I think, you know, that's really what the extension process is about, and the, you know, and so, well, and also the, you know, the ability to you know, post issues on the main spec. And if there is, you know, something informal that enough people think would be an important part of the spec, then I think that, you know, the community will and the you know, the maintainers will look at that and sort of, you know, ask for feedback from the community, and if there's enough support for it, make it part of that. So that's my take. I don't know if others have thoughts.
Does anyone else want to join in on that? I would just say, I think the documentation for building a BIDS app is, I think there's quite a lot of work that could be done to make that sort of process a little bit smoother. And I think anyone who is, the other thing that I want to just sort of jump off on from Russ's point is that because there's so much work that's been done for BIDS already, it can feel kind of rude to criticize it. And obviously, if you criticize it in an unkind way, which nobody has so far, then it is rude. But there is scope and there is need for expanding it and adding to it and clarifying the wording. And so, kind of, please don't limit yourselves to thinking that there's no future development and no contribution that you could add to that. I think any documentation around these things would be really good. I can hear some background noise. Is anyone else hearing background noise?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I think, was it Robert? I think it feels okay now. So yeah, so I don't know what was happening there, sorry, but hopefully that's not too bad. There is a question, there's a question about guidelines to structure larger medical EEG and IEG data sets in BIDS. This is from Dora and Yang. What would be a good platform? I think that question is talking about, like, what would be a good platform to put really large data on? So does anyone have a good answer to that? Robert, do you want to give that a try?
I think the question is more on what would be the good place to put the guidelines.
Oh, okay.
Right, Dora?
Yeah, does anyone have
I don't know whether Dora can quickly type this somewhere, but that's how I take the question. And I think so. The way that I see the BIDS ecosystem is that on the one hand we have the specification, which is a rather dry text, and I think it should stay dry. We should be careful in extending it because we really have to make sure that everyone can rely on it. But there's also a much more lively documentation that has to go around it, and I think that's also where the BIDS starter kit is at this moment already a very valuable asset, but not so visible yet. So for me, the first idea of this would be, well, let's add it to the BIDS starter kit. It's and of course, Dora, you know it because you've already contributed to it. but it's also for the other people that are listening along. It's based on a wiki. You don't have to log in. You can just directly edit. You don't need special Git skills or so. And I think that is something that we should further like make more visible, so that people can contribute their insights, their guidelines on different domains, such as medical data sets, organizing them in BIDS.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Dora is one of the original creators there. And then I also think that maybe, you know, like I was saying, that we're hoping that the website will become a bit more of a hub. Maybe you could write like a little kind of 3 short paragraph kind of blog post to explain why it's really helpful, because hopefully that will be and then link out to the starter kit for the guidelines, because hopefully that will be a place that people will be able to come to. We can promote it and we can share. Thank you. Are there is there anyone on the panel that wants to grab any of the other 2 questions?
Yeah, I'll say something about Jan's question about, so the next one is a question about why, basically, you know, why we're storing things in text rather than in a database. And, you know, there's a few ways to answer that. And, you know, partly this goes back to one of the really early principles of BIDS, which is basically do things as similarly as possible to the way that most labs do it on their own, right? And most labs, at least when we started, we were focusing on fMRI labs, and I think it's similar also for EEG, MEG labs. Most labs store things as flat files on a file system, right? So metadata are stored in text files or spreadsheets, and you know, you're not really storing things in a database. And so the initial reason to do it that way was to try to keep the practice as close as possible, and to not require people to learn a whole new technology to come on board, right? I mean, you have to learn JSON, but that's not that big of a lift. Learning, you know, to work in a database would be a kind of a very different thing. Now, having said that, you know, to work with BIDS data, you probably, you know, you may well want to bring them into a database. So for example, if you work in PyBids, you know, what it does is it indexes the data into some kind of SQL database, I think. But so that's not, you know, so I think that the data sitting there on the file system are one thing, how you work with them is another. So I would think of the database stuff as being more on the kind of tooling side than on the fundamental data spec side. I don't know if others have things to say about that.
And maybe I can add something quickly to this. So for example, we have a big database of PET, but also all kinds of deep phenotypic information. And for us, it's very strange that while all the text information is actually in a real database that we handle, where you have all the, let's say also the IDs for all the images are still also just scattered somewhere, and the blood data is scattered somewhere else. So in that sense, even when you have a database with a lot of the phenotypic information, getting this one package where you, for example, can pull blood data and images in one big thing, and I just push this into something, even a commercial product like PMOD, and it brings me out a BPND, that is very, very helpful. So in that sense, even if you have a database where you have lots of other stuff stored, I don't think that replaces packaging the imaging information together with the metadata so compactly that you can push it through processing.
Maybe one more thing here. So at the Donner Center, we've been doing neuroimaging for more than 15 years. And I've seen the way that we've been dealing with data, especially dealing with archiving of data, really changing. Like in the old days, everything went on CDs, then it went onto burnable DVDs, then it went onto USB hard drives. Now we store, at a certain time, we stored stuff on tape. Now we store stuff on a large hard disk storage system. Like also the archive is a hot archive. And I think in that respect, a file-based system will work very long in the future as well. Whereas a system that requires computers to run to keep it accessible, such as a database server, is going to be much more challenging to maintain in a perspective of 10 or 15 years. And for me, the data that I'm now acquiring, I hope the data is still going to be scientifically valuable in 10 or 15 years if I document it properly.
That's the dream, right? That's the dream. There was a question that came in advance of this call on the Google form, and Gila, I think you were I think it fits into some of the things that we're talking about now, so I'll just read it out. It says, is there a way to save BIDS format so that the final file size is as small as possible? I ask this because looking at the publicly available BIDS format dataset, the file sizes are generally very large for relatively little data.
Yeah. Well, sorry. In the MEG community, we tried to compress our files with the MEG files, and there was not too much difference. That's because of the way the MEG files are, the information they contain. And also, I wanted to clarify that the BIDS relates mainly to the way of organizing your data, not as much as external format or an additional format you should store your data in. I think this is one of the good potential things of the BIDS, because you still have your data format, but you only have to add very small metadata files. And well, Robert was pointing also that it's true that in MRI, in the MRI field, you can compress your data to Nifty, or maybe you can extend on that, Robert?
Yes, so for MRI data, the BIDS is using Nifty, and BIDS also explicitly specifies that you can use gzipped Nifties. I think that's more or less as small as it gets with this type of data. So I think neuroimaging data just has this impractical tendency to be large, and that's just something that we have to deal with. I don't think that the structure that BIDS adds around it, that it makes it specifically larger.
Yeah, so there's an extra part of that question of, in a sense, we're trying to figure out what the best technique to use when saving in the BIDS format, what information is crucial to maintain and what information is optional. And I don't know, because I don't know if this person is live on the call. They might have been asking it and they'll watch the recording afterwards. But it springs to mind around like a derivative. So I don't know if now is a good time. Russ, would you mind just giving a little update on the derivatives? And I don't know if it makes sense that there's potentially parts of derivatives that don't need to be shipped, you know, that if there's intermediate files or anything like that. I don't know if that's part of what the person who's asking the question is thinking about with the data sets becoming very large. I might be totally wrong and it's not relevant. So
yeah, I'm not sure either where that question was going at, because the metadata in general is really small compared to the raw data files. And at least for MR, the raw data files are stored in, you know, generally in compressed Nifty, so they can't get any smaller. So yeah, if it's about derivatives, then certainly derivatives can get very big very quickly. The derivative standard is very close, or at least, sorry, the derivative standard is very close to being, you know, ready to put out for a kind of final public comment. And the hope is that, you know, within a month or so, there will be, or at least a month or two, there will be a, you know, a first derivative standard. And so I think, you know, in part it's going to be, I don't think the derivative standard is going to say, you know, you have to store these particular things. The derivative standard is going to say, if you're going to store these things, this is how you store them. So in some sense, it'll be up to, you know, application developers to decide, we want to store, you know, this particular set of things or not. So I think there's going to, you know, there's going to need to, obviously, you know, having the standard is one thing, having it implemented, you know, we've implemented a version of it in fMRI prep, and you can, you know, quibble about whether you agree with the, you know, what we're deciding to store or not. But I think that's going to be a discussion to have with, you know, the people building the individual applications.
And one of the things that I'll just shout out, because maybe someone can put the link to the because I want to put a link to the rendered version of the derivatives pull request. That it's kind of cool. It's a different color to the BID standard. It says, I think, draft through it, just to be very clear that it's still open for comment. But that's a little bit easier maybe than reading, the raw text of the pull request. So I know that Stefan and Franklin and Chris Margaret did some work around making sure that this was a little bit easier to read, because it is a very, very important extension for BIDS. So that's where you can, I think the link has gone to everyone in the webinar. So if you wanted to go check that out, you can look at that. And it's red and it says draft, and you're all fine.
Yeah. One other thing to add, Chris Markovich made a comment that I think hasn't shown up for everybody yet. With regard to derivatives, at least, there's no obligation to keep everything. So, it's not, an individual user can delete any part of the derivatives that they want to, and it should, I don't know if I want to say this and and have it be sure that it'll be true all the time, but I would guess that it'll still be valid even if you delete some of the particular derivatives. Obviously, we have to see what exactly it looks like in the end.
Okay. Yeah.
To the link that I just sent. If you want to find this back, in the lower right corner of the BID specification, there's a small box on which you can click for the different versions. So also, if you want to go back to an older version of the specification, that's also where you can find it. And the drafts, the drafts that are now very close to being merged will also appear there.
Thank you. And then there was another question that came in from the Google form. I think Melanie was going to answer that one.
So I'll just read the question since you guys cannot see it. So basically the question was, what are the near and long-term plans to build a robust software ecosystem to easily construct conformant BIDS datasets? And this has been a major hurdle to adoption at my institution, that person wrote. And I think that's something we all have run into. I'm not sure we have a good answer for this now. One thing I think that's a big hurdle is that, we can come up with some kind of tools and some kind of scripts and we can share them. But the problem is every institution has their own idiosyncratic way of storing things and naming things. For something as, like PET, where you have blood data coming in some type of text file, you have a PET image coming in another type of file that's not a Nifty even yet. There are dozens of different ways of storing things, and then to pull all of this information together and make that an app that would run at another institution, I don't know. I can only tell one of the solutions we have come up with. So in one of an upcoming research projects, we'll have a postdoc actually go around and visit different research institutions. He wants to use all the data from 4 different sites, and what he will do, he will actually travel and visit those institutions and help them convert data to BIDS, so he can then use them and pull all the data together. And that is definitely the low-tech solution. But of course, sharing scripts and across sites is going to be also helpful, because once you have something running, it's much more easy to adapt it to your own site. So maybe the others can add to this.
Yeah, so I can add a little bit. So one thing to say is, one of the most popular tools is Hudicon, and Matias Gonçalves, who was one of the developers of Hudicon, is now working with my group, and he's part of our Open Neuro project. And one of the aims on that grant is actually to try to make it easier for people to get data into BIDS. So one of our goals in the next year or so is to try to basically, because Hudicon works well, but it's a big lift to get it running. It's hard to set things up. And so we want to build tooling to try to help people kind of, get their data in more easily. And so, we'll also be doing work along those lines.
Did anyone else on the panel, or did anyone in the who's listening want to add anything? I kind of love that it's like one of the shortest questions, but also asking about near and long-term plans to build a robust software ecosystem. Seems that's pretty big, but that's also what I will sort of say my perspective on this is that it will be on brand if you've ever met me, that documentation is going to be key. And so the tool itself for getting things into BIDS is probably sort of necessary, but probably not the hardest part. The hardest part, I think, is going to be the documentation to help people, and particularly, like Melanie was saying, getting information from the standards that individual institutions or research groups are using into BIDS formats, and kind of helping people over that hump, I think, is going to be really big. And so, in my opinion, the very, very best people to write that documentation are the people who are struggling through it right now. So the BIDS starter kit is a really great place to add that. So if you think of the BIDS starter kit as kind of the place that you can put the things that you wish you had known when you started trying to use BIDS to help kind of future you, I think that'd be a really great place. And if anyone wants to promote particular tools that they have that are, you know, that they think exist and work well, but maybe people don't know about them, then I want to just like throw back to the website, because maybe you could write a couple of paragraphs so we could put it up on a blog there, and then people would know a little bit more about it. That might be a really good way of sort of sharing that information a little bit more.
So there's another question. I don't know if we want to jump to this other question from Craig about, which is sort of relevant to the software ecosystem on the other side, which is about BIDS apps, right? And so I think the first thing to say is that, you know, BIDS apps is not an official part of the spec right now. BIDS apps is something that, you know, Chris and others developed a while ago, and I think this question is, you know, is very relevant, because BIDS apps is the whole concept has basically been a little bit moribund for a while, and so we Chris Markovich has been thinking about basically kind of BIDS apps 2.0, or what we think of as kind of like an execution spec for you know, for software around BIDS. I don't know how far out that is going to be, but the goal is to basically make, you know, both address the question that Craig's asking, which is like, how do I find BIDS apps that actually do something that I want to do? And I agree that the current site is not optimal for that. And so hopefully in the next year or so, you know, we will have a much more robust spec for like how to build BIDS apps, and, you know, better documentation and support for actually both building them and kind of finding them and using them.
I think one of the coolest things would be actually to have a few more demos of really, really lightweight BIDS apps. So there's some really massive, powerful, so FMRI Prep is this awesome BIDS app that does amazing things. Well, not amazing things, like it does reproducibly the same things that lots of people have been doing, but chains them really nicely together. But I don't want anyone to think that all BIDS apps need to be like as sort of heavy as that one. And so if anyone has, I know that folks from NeuroHack Academy over previous years, by the way, NeuroHack Academy applications are open and you should apply or tell people about it. I know that there are people who build BIDS apps in a few days, in a week, and they do a couple of things. They do one thing, they do it really well, and I feel like some more demonstrations of those types of lightweight ones might be really nice for helping people on board. We're sort of zooming through. Thank you everyone for all the questions. If you want to add in any more questions, you're very welcome to. I know there was another one that we missed from the end of another question that Guillermo was going to answer.
Yeah, well, it was last part of the question on the Google form, and it says, can you provide a list of toolboxes for MEG and AG data analysis that support BIDS, or the BIDS format? And I wanted to mention that in the webpage, there's just a whole section of tools for converting into BIDS, and also the main software tools like for MEG and EEG, like Brainstorm, Fieldtrip, MNE Python, SPM, and I think they have tools for data analysis. But maybe Robert can also comment on that.
Yeah, so I've been discussing this quite at multiple occasions with the other toolbox developers for MEG and EEG, and I think that each of these toolboxes wants to further embrace BIDS and wants to make the toolbox compatible with BIDS. I think most of us are now primarily working on getting data into the BIDS format, more than actually working with data that's in the BIDS format, because we have a little bit of this chicken and egg situation. Like if the data is not in BIDS, then it doesn't make sense to have a tool that can process it. So that's my feeling, that at this moment, most of the efforts have been going into exporting to BIDS. Once that is more or less in place, and of course that just takes time, I think each of us will also move to importing in BIDS. So next week we have the OpenMR Benelux meeting at Donders in Nijmegen. We're going to have a hackathon as well, and then we're going to work on BIDS MATLAB, which is, I think, going to be very helpful for EG Lab and for SPM and for Field Trip, or for Brainstorm, so that we can actually also share code for getting data into MATLAB. So that I think each of the large toolboxes is already doing this, and I think it will be important to think about, like, which toolbox do you want to use and how can you contribute to that specific toolbox. I don't think that there's going to be like one general thing to get MEG EG data into MATLAB. I think it's always going to be bound to one of these toolboxes.
There's also, just to note, there's also a comment from Scott McKeag to the panelists basically saying that Arno from his group has written BIDS to EG Lab and EG Lab to BIDS converter, so you can, at least in that ecosystem, go in both directions.
Awesome. So Franklin, this is going to bring you and Eric, I think, because I'm looking at the time, we've only got 10 more minutes. So thank you everyone for asking all these questions. They're really great, and obviously thank you to my fellow steering group members for answering them all. But Eric is here to talk about the extension that he's been working on, and I wonder if either Eric, right, so I can see a message. Is that because it's not easy for Eric to speak, or is Eric able to now speak? Oh, you're muted, Franklin.
Can people hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you need to see me. I look fine, but so I emailed Franklin earlier. This is really short, I think, about BIDS extension proposal 15. So it was about file mapping, which came up at the Stanford Center for Reproducible Neuroscience coding sprint, I believe you guys called it, Russ, right? In 2017. And we were just talking about some way of standardly going from whatever BIDS derivative someone outputs into BIDS derivative standard format. So as I think all of us are aware that process data in any way, shape, or form, it comes out in whatever lab standard names are produced. And the idea behind this file mapping file, whatever, was just to make it easier to rename things and reshape things so that you'd have BIDS derivative standards when you were done. And Camille and Vasu and I were the leads on that, but it's practically speaking just a tool at this point. I've used it heavily for setting up the ABCD BIDS data that just got released on the NIMH Data Archive not too long ago, to get all of our data that came out of the pipeline into a BIDS standard derivative format as best we could with the derivative specs as they are now. But long story short, like I said in an email to Franklin earlier today, I don't really think it needs a whole just like you talked about earlier, a simpler way to publicize tools that come out and get them seen by BIDS users and the BIDS community is really all I would be concerned about or worried about. So with that, I think that's all I really have to say, unless anybody has questions for me.
I don't see any questions. I think it all makes sense. Thank you so much for talking us through that. Does anyone on the panel want to comment or share any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this kind of thing is going to be really important to help smooth over, the gap between when the derivative standard exists and, basically the time between the derivative standard exists and when we convince software developers to actually output directly into the the BIDS derivatives kind of format, because obviously that's a large ask for software developers to completely change their output format. So I think we're going to have these kind of shims to sort of move between things. So that's great work.
Awesome. So we have just 5 minutes left at the end. This is, I guess, your last call out for if you want to ask any questions. There's some useful links that are being pinged in the chat for finding out more about the tool. Congratulations to the ABCD team for releasing such a huge and really powerful data set in BIDS format. Thank you so much. I'm currently working on a registered report to use that data, so you've just made my life a lot easier. Really appreciate that. Oh wait, and Eric had a question, but it's been closed, about finding a way for our colleagues to let us know like what their needs are and things like that. I thought originally that the best thing to do would be to create a excuse me, a Eurostars post. I think that'd be really good. I think that'd be searchable, but I think we might also want to collect information in a more accessible way. So any thoughts on the ways that your colleagues might best want to get in touch, please let us know. I'm about to have a coughing fit, so I'm going to mute, and maybe the other folks on the panel can just finish up with a couple of thoughts while I cough for a little while.
So maybe we can just mention there's another question that just came in by Yen. I don't know if you saw it. It's like, do you also consult BIDS with companies? Is there any chance that it will be adopted by commercial sector in reasonably near future? I can just say in terms of the pet community, there's one company that offers kinetic modeling, and that's PMod, and they are actually, as far as I know, in the process of also accepting BIDS as an input format. So some of them have realized, since we're now pushing the guidelines papers, for example, then there is stuff coming. But yeah, Russ can add to this, I guess.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is that, like on the kind of front end, like Flywheel is a company that sells, Eric just mentioned that. Flywheel is a company that is popular for kind of data management on the MR side. And they now have tools to output to BIDS format. It takes a bit of work, but nonetheless, that you can output to BIDS from that. And so I think that, the community's certainly been open to, interacting with companies when it's relevant.
Also, in the EEG fields, brain products, the German company making the brain amps, which are used also a lot in combination with fMRI. Brain Products now has a tool that helps in converting their data to BIDS as well. They're really very interested in this because they realize that they really want to help the researchers in using their tools in the best way. So I think the companies are also seeing market opportunities here, which I think is also good motivation for them to work on this.
Fab. Can everyone hear me? My screen is going really strange. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, cool. So we just have a couple of minutes left at the end, and one of the things that we said in the webinar on Tuesday, but we haven't really said, we've sort of implied today, but I want to make it really explicit that the role of the steering group is neither to make the decisions nor to do the work, somewhat hilariously. So what are we? What do we even do? There's a blog post that we all wrote that you can check out on the news section of the website that sort of tells you a little bit more about what we're interested in. But really, we are sort of the shepherds of the community. And so we're here to listen, we're here to learn what you want to do, and hopefully we're here to make it a little bit easier for people who have time and are interested in helping out. We're hopefully here to kind of try and give a little bit more direction on where that help can be allocated. So that's just the last thing that I want to finish on, is that we're not kind of gonna do everything, but we're hopefully gonna kind of think about the short, medium, and long-term future of BIDS and bring us all forward as a community.
So before we go, there's one last
question
from.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's one last question from Scott McCaig about head tags, he was asking what the status is. So head tags are basically something used in the EEG world to describe events, and I think it's actually a really nice framework. And my understanding is that that they're now basically the validator's been updated so it can actually handle those. So Scott, I think it should be in good shape, but you can talk to us directly if there are issues.
I'm really sorry, everyone. I have gotten.
I'm super sorry. I've gone completely dark. I can't see anything and I can't hear anything anymore. So I am gonna peace out, and somebody else can say loving goodbye to everyone.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining today.
Yeah.
Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the discussion, and hope to meet you all soon again, either online or in person.
Exactly. See you guys around.
See you.
See you all. Thank you for coming.